We talk a lot on this channel about art, right? What is art, philosophizing about it, all that stuff, right? But one thing I feel like we often skirt around that's probably the most commonly talked about thing in art is art criticism, right? There's this idea that you can take any piece of art, despite its subjectivity, and still critique it on its merits, on the ideas presented in it, XYZ, right? And I don't think anyone would disagree that what we consider to be good art criticism comes from somebody with good taste, right? I want to ask that question today. What is good taste? What does that mean? Good taste. Like, that's an interesting thing, right? Like, isn't it a little weird that in this zone of creation where we have everything in the world and we all agree, like, this is all subjective stuff, right? We all agree that there's no such thing as a rubric to make good art. We also have this class of people that we can look at and be like, they have good taste. That's really interesting to me. What I think is even more interesting about this is that David Hume has ideas on what good taste is. Of course, the famous philosopher, David Hume. That's weird. Like, that's a weird thing, right? That he has ideas on what makes a good art critic. I'm not going to fully go into his ideas and break them down today, because that's not what this video is about. But I do think that his general framework here tells us a lot about what good taste is. But I kind of also want to go against his ideas a little bit, because I think that a lot's happened since David Hume wrote that, and like, I don't know when David Hume wrote that. 17 something, maybe? That feels right. That feels like a David Hume kind of era. Either way, right? David Hume looks at art criticism more or less the exact same way that we all do in modern society, where he's like, everything's subjective. However, with that, you still got these guys who are really good at telling you what's good subjective and what's bad subjective. They're pretty solid guys to go to. You know, maybe not in the way of like they're perfect, they're 100% correct, but in the way of like we want to know what the best art is. We have maybe 100 years on this planet. When David Hume was writing it, I think people were probably like kicking the bucket like 15 or something. I don't even know what was going on back then. So he's like, we got a limited amount of time. You want to consume the best art. These are some good guys to ask, right? He considers these guys largely in the same light we consider them. The first and foremost one is experience, right? You want somebody who's looked at a great deal of art. You want somebody who is able to look at all this art and be like, I've looked at all of it, right? I mean, I've seen a million movies, so when I see that new Marvel movie, I'm the guy going, this isn't as good as as you guys think it is, because I've seen a million of these, and I know what a really good movie looks like, right? This is something that often just happens today, right? Like, we all know the jokes of the pretentious guys who are like, well, the last Fantastic Four was nothing in comparison to the last Wes Anderson film. Like, we all make fun of that kind of thing, right? And I think it's actually very interesting that despite the fact that we're having jokes like this happen in the year 2025, this is something that can go back all the way to the times of David Hume, where even he was going, like, somebody who's seen more stuff is gonna have a very different perspective, right? This is clearly, I can only assume, a fairly timeless phenomenon, right? Like, if Letterboxd was around when David Hume was, he would have a field day with it, probably. To be clear, he wasn't specifying these people are annoying. He was just specifying that somebody who's consumer will have different taste and what he considers to be better taste. He also goes through some other things, right? Some things that we all also consider a fine-tooth comb, somebody with a great attention to detail, right? Nobody would disagree with that. Somebody who, like me, when I hear a song, I can't separate bass from melody, from lyrics. I just hear like one thing. A lot of people hear mostly bass or most like guitar or like something like that. For me, I'd be a terrible song critic, right? I mean, I have a very basic taste in music. I like what I like, but I'm not ever gonna run around being like, I could really tell you what's great about that last Lorde album. No, I'm just gonna be able to tell you I liked it, because I can't really pick things out with a fine-tooth comb. I can just know what do I like. So by David Hume's standard, I'd be terrible at this. I'm sorry, Hume, I'm really sorry. And then, he goes into things like knowledge of craft, XYZ, right? These are all very interesting, and I think that these also make for a pretty good rule set, right? Pretty good, almost in a consensus sense too, based on the fact that we, for hundreds of years at this point, have more or less used this framework to be able to tell who's a good critic from who's a bad critic, right? That's pretty interesting. Also, shout out to you, David Hume. You really got a good one there, right? For the sake of brevity in this video, and for the sake of not dragging on a David Hume explanation for too long, what other things do you guys consider to be good critics, right? What do you consider, like, this is a trait of a good critic? It's probably somewhere in that explanation too. Even if it's not, you can throw it in there because it'll still work for what we're going to talk about here today. Because I think with that, we still don't have any answers to the question, what makes good taste? We probably have an answer to the question of what makes a good taste maker, what makes a good critic, right? Like, that's a pretty solid answer. But I think there's a hole in this whole thing, right? This is the reason I don't believe in art criticism as a whole, at least as a practice. I think it's a necessary thing that should exist. I think it's really cool, and I love watching reviews of things. But I don't think that the field itself stands on its own two legs, right? Because taste and criticism is very much subject to the times, right? You could have a critic right now who is like, I just think that Baby Shark, is that the name of the, or not Baby Shark, what's that kid show? Cocomelon. They're like, I think Cocomelon is profound, high art, and I think that this is the best thing ever made, right? And of course, everybody would kick him out of the critic building or wherever these guys meet, and they'd be like, you're a hack, you're not a good critic. You know, maybe they have the traits. Let's say this is the most experienced guy on earth, right? Let's say they have a fine-tooth comb. Let's say they've seen everything, and this is still their take, right? We would, maybe we'd still be like, this is a valid critic. This is a guy, especially if he could write down his ideas in some sort of palatable way, maybe we would still be like, this is a good critic, right? But everybody's, this guy has no taste though, maybe we'll be like, he is writing an interesting point here, especially if, I think the criticism world be open to like Cocomelon's a postmodern commentary on how we raise our kids, let's say he does something like that. They'd be like, this guy's a good critic, terrible taste. Jim, great for talking about the modernity of Cocomelon, whatever that means. Terrible if you want a movie rec for tonight, right? And that's also a function of critics, right? As David Hume says, we go to critics for a reason. There's a reason that whenever I have limited time to watch a movie, I go to the top-rated things on Letterboxd. I want to know, what does everyone like? And that's an interesting point here, right? Because critics might be shaped by what they're good at talking about, right? They might be shaped by how much experience they have, how they can articulate their ideas. However, what we consider to be good and good taste is very much shaped by a consensus of what do people like right now. There's sort of a subjective consensus of what good taste is. There's a lot of clothing items that are very trendy right now, right? If you open TikTok, just like have fun, click off this video, go open TikTok. First 10 things you see, buy all those, you'll be trendy. You'll be on trend, everyone will be like, this is a cool guy, right? You'll probably be considered to have good taste. I know there are people who I went to school with, whether it be high school or in college, they dressed very on trend, and everyone's like, this guy has amazing taste. This is a tastemaker. Now, though, of course, they're a little bit older. They're kind of less in the loop of what's trendy and what's cool, and everybody's just going, oh, this is just a normal guy. This is just Jim now. Have you guys noticed, why is every random person I make up named Jim? I think it's because I'm so scared of using a real name and like actually outing somebody in my life, I guess, which they wouldn't care. If I used the real name of that guy, nobody would know. His name's probably just gonna be a white guy name. But either way, that's a weird side tangent, I guess, so that's interesting. But, taste is very much subject to the times, is the point of this, right? How modern you can be, how in the loop you can be, is very much going to be subject to what is popular right now, what's considered good right now, what's considered cool right now. Maybe the ideals that we use to consider something like Blonde by Frank Ocean, a great album, will disappear in 50 to 100 years, and we'll be going, yeah, that was really weird that they thought that was a great album back then, It's rare that you look back at history and like, there's not many masterpieces of music or art that are like, everybody's always thought this was a masterpiece. It's usually either it takes time for people to warm up to it or it falls in and out of favor, stuff like that, right? So we've established that taste is subject to times, right? Taste is very much subject to what the consensus of people is. Now one might say, okay, well, the critics shape this consensus. In a way they do, yes, but not really. Like, they can shape the consensus. There are circumstances in our history where a critic wrote an essay, wrote down their ideas, and it got everybody to be like, we should consider this, right? But largely, what's considered to be good has nothing to do with what critics are doing, it has to do with what artists are doing. Genre works in a very similar way, where people will be like for not hundreds of years, for many years when an artist comes onto a scene, they'll be like, this is a great artist. Technically, they're not punk rock though. Then 20 years down the line, everybody's like, that's a punk rock artist, right? Some stuff like that happens a lot, especially in genres that are a little bit more niche. A lot of artists are being grouped in the alternative category right now, and they would have totally been considered to be pop rock 10 years ago, right? Genre works in a very similar way to taste, where something is considered good, then an artist comes along and they do a new thing. Flare jeans, very recent example of this. Flare jeans have been slightly on the rise for a while, but they had a pretty big moment. I'm sure you all remember it. Earlier this year, Kendrick Lamar wore, I believe it was, were they Chanel? I think they were Chanel flare jeans to the Super Bowl for his performance, right? Everybody was wearing flare jeans after this, right? It was like everybody was like, this is it, flare jeans are back. Let's say there was an artist, or not an artist critic, an outfit critic, who was reviewing this before that happened, right? Some random guy on the street was wearing flare jeans. They would go, that's not good. I don't like this. Like, they would be like, this is not, you know, that doesn't work. Like, these flare jeans don't work. And then something comes along, the taste shifts, and suddenly that guy on the street was ahead of the times, right? Now, I know what a lot of people are saying. Well, no, that's not how that works. The critic, because they're a good critic, would be like, flare jeans are coming back because this guy's wearing them. Rarely that's how that works, though. That's usually never how that goes. Usually what happens is the critics are wrong until somebody shifts the consensus opinion and the critics catch up, right? Because if there was a way for critics to always be right 100% of the time, that would mean there's an objective rubric of what is value, what is good, right? That would mean that the same set of clothing items or paintings or songs or albums or movies or books or you name it would be popular and good forever, because there's an ideal that they can hold them up against and critique them, right? So maybe, you know, art criticism is possible, right? You can articulate your ideas, your opinions, you can do it well. However, I think it holds a lot less value for me when I think about the fact that critics are always a step behind artists, behind what comes next, because they can't see that. Like, I mean, even most critics agree they can never do what an artist does, and most artists can't even do what a great artist does, right? I mean, I know I can't, and I've been painting for 221 days in this cube like an idiot. I mean, you know, it takes a lot. They're always going to be a step behind. Like, that's always just how this has historically worked, and for that, it causes me to put a lot less value in what we consider to be good taste to be. Good taste is your algorithm and what does well on it these days. It has nothing to do with what anybody says, and it usually is just what's popular. Who has shifted the narrative on these things? Drake was a guy that for a while could do this, where it's like anything Drake wore, this was the biggest thing. Kanye's like, I feel like the historical example of this, where everybody's like, you'll be doing what Kanye's doing in 5 years. And I feel like that is post like 2018 that really starts falling apart. Even though his fashion, I'll give it to him, but you know, despite everything that's happened since, the fashion he was wearing in 2018 has probably come a little bit more into trend. So, you know, maybe on the outfits he's still ahead. I doubt it, but maybe. But that's always been the precedent. Is like what Kanye's wearing is going to be the next big thing. You know, this is considered to be a tastemaker. Tastemakers are almost always artists. Pharrell, great example. Tyler, the Creator, great example. I remember when he first put on the getup he kind of wears now, of like the suit jackets that are like a little short with the pants. Well, of course he's always been wearing pants. I mean, that would be weird. But, you know, when he put that on, I remember everyone was like, this is stupid, this is dumb. 5 years from Call Me If You Get Lost, when he first really started doing that, everything shifted. So many people are dressing like that now. Like, even if not, they're not like throwing on that getup because you'd look like an idiot walking everywhere in that, right? You'd also probably be very hot with that hat. But, you know, everybody's taken an element of that and worked it into their style now. That's a great example of that. The consensus has shifted. The critics, the way they evaluate things, will shift too. Because even if they have amazing taste, even if they can go through things with a fine-tooth comb and very well articulate their ideas, they will always be subject to the rubric of their times and what that says, because they are not referenceless. And that's why I don't think good taste can exist, and I don't think good critics can exist. I think people who are trying to catch up can exist, and people who can articulate their ideas exist, but always these things will be behind art. That's my take, everybody. Let me know yours in the comments below. This is the painting, final one with this color palette you're sick of seeing. I'm sick of seeing it too. Let's just get this off the screen. Until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint&Talk episode 221. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.